And let's just talk about the wake-up routine, the morning, because this is where it often starts in most living environments. And so one thing that we want to remind you is that this person has some forgetfulness. You may take care of them every day, but they may not remember everything they need to remember about you to feel safe and secure. When you come in the house, they may not recognize you, who you are, or when you come into the home. So in care homes, often it's an apartment or a private room. And so the first thing you do, we try to get people to do, is to knock on the door, identify yourself, ask permission to come in. And the caveat is wait for the answer before you walk through the door. Because what we usually do is, hi, it's Al, I'm just here to change your bed, can I come in? And by the time you say, can I come in, you're at the bedside. And my friend Courtney Nygaard, who's a psychologist that consults at nursing homes, says, how would you feel if you woke up in the morning, it's 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning, and you got kind of the cobwebs, and all of a sudden you see somebody you don't know standing by your bed, and they start pulling your clothes off. What are you going to do? You're probably going to slug them. You're probably going to react violently. And this is what happens, and yet we're surprised when it happens. And he says that as a psychologist, what you do when you have an appointment is you start by reestablishing the therapeutic bond that you have with people. And so he says what you ought to do is you ought to go in and you ought to sit down, say hello, reintroduce yourself, and say, how was your night? And then the next thing you have to do is you have to close your mouth and listen. There was a speech pathologist who did a study of communication in nursing homes and found that when there are conversations going on, 92% of the words come from the care staff. So it's a monologue. It's not really a dialogue. And we tend to do this. We tend to not give the person the ability and the time and space to speak. And so this is a good way to start because most, Dr. Cohen Mansfield says that most episodes of resistiveness to personal care come from the way the person was approached by the care partner. Doesn't mean you're bad people. It means you haven't figured out the approach that works for that person. And these people are our teachers. They are better teachers than the neurologists and the geriatricians and the psychiatrists out there because they live with it. And they tell you what works for them, what creates well-being, and what erodes well-being. And my friend Jane Verity from Australia says, if you want to know if your approach is right, just look in the eyes of the person, and they will tell you right away whether you're doing the right thing or not. And they will teach you how to better care for them. And I love the quote in one of Natter's books where he says, actually, it's not in this book. It's actually in the newsletter that's coming out. I had a preview of the newsletter, the AgeSong newsletter. He said, by caring for elders, we care for the part of us that will someday grow old, or will grow old someday, something like that. It's a really, really striking comment that he said better than I can remember at this point. So the first thing I always encourage people to do whenever they go in to visit somebody, besides knocking, asking permission, is to sit down. And there's a few reasons for that. And I know that when you're there to do a task that requires standing, this seems kind of like a waste of time because we're focused on the schedule and the tasks. And why should I sit down when I have to stand up to do my work? Well, part of your work is connecting with that person, and it makes the rest of your work so much easier if you connect with that person to start. So there's 3 other reasons to sit down. Number 1, it facilitates communication. You've got eye contact, lip reading, hearing, seeing is all right there. Secondly, it sends a very positive nonverbal cue because, I could be coming over here and I can be as nice to Maria as possible. I can say the nicest things, but what's going on here? What's this image? Who's in charge here? Who's in control when I stand over her? And particularly with people who are angry or physically resistive, when you stand over them, you are putting them in a position where you feel like you're controlling them. No matter how nicely you speak, this is the image that people get, the nonverbal cue from your body language. The third reason to sit down is because it sends another nonverbal message, and that is, I have time for you today. I have time to listen what you have to say. And they did a study once with doctors in private practice, and they said, do your usual appointments, but half of you, when you talk to your patients, sit in a chair, and the other half stand up during the whole time. And then they did their days, and they interviewed the patients coming out of the office and asked them about their visits. And even though the substance of the visits was not significantly different, the patients whose doctors sat thought that the doctors spent about twice as much time with them as those whose doctors stood up, and also felt that the doctors were more attentive and caring about their problems than the doctors who stood up. When you're standing in the door saying, is there anything else you need, you're sending a very important message that don't answer me because I'm on my way out of here, okay? So there's a lot of reasons to sit down with somebody, to make sure they're comfortable, to make sure that there's quiet and space. When you live with dementia, you have trouble processing lots of noises and competing sounds. So if you sit down in the TV lounge with a television and intercom and a conversation and try to get something meaningful from somebody, you may not be able to get anything at all. A lot of people who I've been told don't talk have actually spoken to me. And it's not that I'm magical, but if you create the right space where you are centered, where you're present, where you have the intention to connect with that person in the right way, all of a sudden they start doing things that maybe other people didn't see them capable of doing. I also remind people when it comes to this sort of asking permission to come in the room that millions of Americans arm themselves with guns at night to keep strangers out of their house. And yet we expect somebody who's confused to allow a stranger to walk in at 2 a.m. without permission and not be frightened or anxious about that. We also kind of pejoratively label people as having intrusive wandering when they go into someone's room and take things that aren't theirs, you know? And I say, well, what do we model as staff? Okay, if you're taking pills from room to room and not asking permission, if you're bringing laundry and opening somebody's drawers and taking things out and putting them in, what are we showing people about what boundaries are? And where do we give a person a sense of privacy and space that they own and that they have control over? And when people have free-floating anxiety or agitation in care environments, it's often because we don't give them that sense of security, that they have some space and some control over their physical surroundings.